What's going on, everybody? We have a really special episode on this one. Dillon Mitchell, electrical engineer, has over $750 million of project management and building electrical expertise under his belt. So we're going to learn about how commercial construction works and electrical and panels and safety. So stay tuned. Don't want to miss this one if you're in any type of commercial environment. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to Beyond the Crete. We have another amazing episode. Today, we have Dillon Mitchell. So I'm going to do a quick bio about Dillon, and then I'm going to give him his 2 minutes to kind of talk about himself. So Dillon Mitchell is a professional electrical engineer that has 750 million. Yep, I said that correctly. 750 million dollars worth of construction experience under his belt, from projects that range from restaurants and TIs to new construction buildings of K through 12, so elementary and higher education buildings, industrial manufacturing, healthcare, hospital practices. So Dillon's mission and that of his company, Kowabunga Studios, is to help provide engineers and contractors an easy path to construction documents. His experience designing and managing large projects gave Dillon expertise to help navigate products and provide drawings and BIM models quickly to help keep your projects going. So with that being said, what kind of 2 minute story can you elaborate on?
Man, so in doing all those projects right over my years of being in engineering, and I went from doing safety stuff to in an architecture and engineering firm, and really about it's coming up on, well, it's a little over 5 years now. I ended up getting shingles putting a hospital project out the door. So I had a 30 operating room renovation, and I got shingles like right as I put design documents out the door. And as I was going on vacation, like 2 days before getting on a plane, I got shingles. So my entire Hawaiian vacation was spent in pain. And if nobody's ever had shingles, I had it on my chest and on my back. So it's hemispherical. So it's on my left side. Basically, it wrapped fully. And I'm a side sleeper, so I couldn't sleep. It was painful for the whole, 10 days or whatever that I had it, no drinks in paradise. And so that really solidified my mission, my purpose to help engineers to really not have to go through this, right? You look around the industry, in construction in general, right? There's high stress, half the people are on high blood pressure meds. They've got, they're overweight, they're stressed out, right? I've seen people have strokes, all the medications people are on. I've had another guy that had shingles here recently. Like, the tumors that I've seen in guys that are like 30, right? I was like 26 at the time. So, I mean, again, like that shouldn't happen to a guy in his 20s. Like I'm running marathons, all that kind of stuff. And, have this happen. So really that solidifies the mission and why I'm doing what I do in Kowabunga Studios, and really helping engineering firms to get drawings out the door faster, whether that's kind of a design assist and we help you to design it, lay it out, get it done quickly for you, or taking it fully through construction documents.
Right on. Cool. Now I want to elaborate more on that in the last bit of that, but let's get to the past. Okay. So spend about 15 minutes or so talking about your past, right? I mean, not childhood per se, but like, when did you get in the construction industry, and like, how did you get started? What were you doing? How could you get from entry level day one to start literally working as an engineer, working on $750 million worth of projects?
Yeah. And I mean, really in getting to like that scale of construction, I mean, I skipped a couple levels, but really for me to get into construction and that whole thing, it really started for me in high school. We moved to Oregon. I lived in Northern Virginia, and kind of after 9/11 and the DC sniper, I was in middle school. My parents, moved us across the country to where my grandparents are on the Oregon coast. And we ended up living off the grid. So we have cattle and all that kind of stuff. And we just couldn't find land, kind of on the coast in Oregon. So we ended up getting 40 acres up in the mountains a little bit. And my neighbor ended up being an electrical engineer from Lawrence Livermore National Labs, worked on laser programs and like, the Reagan Star Wars and a bunch of other, super secret stuff. But that really opened my eyes, and living off the grid, right? We had wind, solar, hydro, generator, right? We had all the stuff living off the grid. And then I had a neighbor who was an electrical engineer, right? And so that really put me on the path to becoming an electrical engineer and going to college for it. I went to Rose-Hulman there in the Midwest in Terre Haute, Indiana. And it really solidified, like I thought, maybe I'd go work for utilities. And I interviewed at a few of them, Duke Energy being the big one there in the Midwest. And that didn't end up happening, right? I wound up working for a company that did arc flash studies. It was a Rose grad that came back. And so arc flash, I know this is a concrete podcast, but it's arc flash is basically anytime that you open up a panel, electrical panel, and you take the covers off, you're working on it, what is the incident energy level that you're exposed to, right? So this is all in calories per centimeter squared, but basically what's the blast if you were to take a crowbar and stick it across all three phases? What's the power and blast that would come out at you, right? This is hotter than the sun. It's molten metal and copper that would come out. There's a sound wave associated to it. So, you got to wear earplugs and then all the PPE that goes with that. So we would determine basically what level of PPE that you would need to protect yourself from that blast, so that the worst case is basically a sunburn, not you're going to the burn unit. And I did that for 5 years, opening up gear and panels and being in industrial facilities with electricians and all that kind of stuff. Basically 2 internships and then 2.5, 3 years full time after I graduated. And then that put me on the path to where man, I was working from home. This was in 2011, right? Like before working from home was a thing. I was working from home, traveling a good amount. Like as a intern, I stayed in a Hampton Inn. So I was like platinum at Hilton as a junior in college, so stuff like that, right? Like the guys that I flew with, they were all gold on Delta. My boss hit platinum by like August every year. He had a lifetime Sky Club membership because he bought it on NWA, before they merged with Delta. He bought the lifetime. That's how much this guy traveled. Like,
wow.
We flew out of Louisville Airport, and so we'd have our polos on with the company name, and they're like, "Hey, where's your boss?" Like, that's how much this guy traveled, right? And so, but in doing that, I got to see a ton of stuff. I got to be a part of a growing organization, but really I got just burnt out. I'm working from home. I'm doing reports all day long. That's because at the end of the day, that's all we're giving, right? As a pack of stickers, we'll go and put them on the gears so that everybody knows what to wear when they open this gear up. And then we're giving reports and recommendations on how to basically become safer and reduce your risk when opening a piece of gear in your plant, right? Fuse changes, breaker setting changes, replacing gear, whatever that might be. And that's effectively what I did for a long time. And I just got to where I was really good at it. I didn't have to think. And I'm a type of guy that needs a challenge. So from there, I ended up getting a job at a local in Louisville, is where I lived at the time, job as a engineer working in an architecture and engineering firm. Completely foreign to me, but because I had so much power system experience, the rest of the stuff was pretty simple for me, right? I've seen and analyzed, hundreds of power systems. I knew what breakers to put in. I've been in these plants. I understand how things got pulled or, conduit got put up. I've never done that myself, but just being in these facilities and having to trace out lines to figure out connections of all this stuff, I learned a lot. And working directly with electricians, right? We're pulling panels covers off. I'm in all the gear. I'm doing all this stuff. And it put me into a spot where, I could go and really have an impact immediately in an architecture and engineering firm, right? I didn't have my license yet. And kind of simultaneously as I'm moving over to this other firm, I'm getting my MBA. So fast forward a year and a half, 2 years, I get my MBA and pretty much my PE simultaneously. And with that, when you on LinkedIn, right, PE, MBA, now I'm getting hit up to go and lead departments, right? And so all the work that I did at that first firm, because I had such good experience, because I had talked to owners, because I pretty much could handle myself in meetings, I led a project for 2 dorm renovations for Berea College as the electrical guy on it. We had a terrible contractor, so I got more face time than I would have otherwise, right? Had the contractor been great and things hadn't been screwed up, I wouldn't have gotten anything. But because they were so bad, I went very often to do meetings and show up and, help out on a lot of the problems that were going on job sites. So that gave me a lot of exposure to these projects. We did a lot of work for Ford, the Kentucky truck plant there in Louisville. So I got to work on some of that. We did work for Brown Foreman, so I get to work on parts of those. For a while, I think I did like 10 restaurants for like World of Beer that we were just cranking through. So I got a lot of experience there, and all of that was in Revit and BIM and this whole world of 3D modeling. Then I basically got a job leading a department. So, I did, a good chunk of work there, probably 50 million worth of work. But then when I went and led a department of 9 guys under me, all electrical designers, we did, this is where like I did all the K-12 stuff. A small project for us was 20 million bucks, right? At elementary school.
Wow.
So the scale really started to go. And because I'm the overseeing like engineer record, right? That's all my projects. So we would do like every guy would do basically 300,000 square feet of work a year, maybe 450, depending on it. They usually have a large high school, right? It's about 300,000 square feet of project plus all the grounds, right? All the ball fields, all the football stadiums, all the parking lots, entrances, all that kind of stuff. And then they would probably do like maybe another small like elementary school, right? Another 100,000 square feet of project in there. And that would be like all the guys. So like 6 of them would do, 400,000 square feet a year. And over my couple of years there, I mean, we just did a lot of work, right? We did 500-600 million in construction value.
Wow.
It's because of the sheer volume of one, I was leading the department. So I, reviewed and signed and sealed everything for them. And then, we did stuff in, all over, primarily in the Midwest, Indiana, Ohio, and then some in Michigan, Louisiana. We did a bunch of projects down there. We had a few in North Carolina, so kind of all over. And then for me, I got to a point where I really wanted a little more. Things weren't quite moving the way that I wanted to, and I was young, right? Like I'm 25 at the time, 26, right? I'm licensed. I've got my MBA. Like I want to move and go. And that's just not the rate that engineering firms and architecture firms move. So I ended up going to a MEP firm, again, recruited me, right? Like I didn't seek these people out. When you have like these credentials,
Sure.
like I get headhunted all the time.
I bet.
So I ended up going to this MEP firm. It was kind of across the street, and ended up 2 months into that into that job, the project manager for healthcare ended up quitting. So there were basically 2 engineering firms that did all of Ascension Healthcare's work in the state of Indiana. The firm that I went to was one of them. And effectively over that, 10 months that I was still there, like I did 100 million in construction for healthcare. We did like 5-6 outpatient facilities, primary care stuff with CTs and x-rays. We did a bunch of x-ray renovations. We did a OR renovation, that's 30 million right there. And then just a bunch of like in hospital stuff, x-ray replacements, CT replacements, all that kind of thing for Ascension Healthcare in Indiana. So like that experience, and I got shoved in these places. So what ended up happening with like me getting shingles was I came in as just a senior engineer. I wasn't really supposed to manage anybody, none of that, just to be the licensed engineer record for the office. So sure, I'd be reviewing projects, but I wasn't going to like manage people's schedules, anything like that. It was a 14-person like satellite office for the company. So I came in thinking that, and then all of a sudden I'm a department head. All of a sudden I'm a project manager for like the largest account in the office. I'm still signing and sealing drawings and reviewing stuff for everybody else. And, like because we don't have the staff and the people, I ended up, doing a lot of my own design work in Revit and BIM because that's my background. I can utilize the tool to put out drawings, and I kind of had to. So that's like it all culminated. And then on top of that, massive deadlines for what was my first healthcare project. And then it just happened to be, OR renovation. So
I mean, it's so much, right? I mean, it's crazy just to hear how one thing just morphs into another and stuff like that, and it's crazy. And I want to touch on one thing because it's something that we can relate to in our industry. When you started talking about the panels, right? So some guys, when we get into big commercial aspects and stuff, when we're doing our floors, concrete polishing, primary grinding, right? We're wiring in 483 phase. Most guys, if they're doing it right, they always hire an electrician to do it right. Some guys have gotten hurt by doing it, but that was one thing that as you mentioned, the opening the panel and seeing that type of danger, it's always been something on the top of my head when I go into these big ass commercial projects.
Yeah, so a couple things there. So more people die from extension cords in their garage than anything else when it comes to electricity.
Oh wow.
So just let that sink in, right?
Okay.
Like most people, like most of the electrocution, right? So you've not been electrocuted because you're still alive. Let's just make that clear. So you've been shocked. So most actual electrocutions, right, where they actually die, it stops their heart, are from frayed extension cords in some guy's driveway as he's working on a car.
Sure.
Right? Extension cord across his chest. I mean, just done.
Wow.
And that's number one. Number two is lighting. Lighting is usually the other place where most people get hurt, right? So in commercial projects, right, it's taken off a ballast, all that kind of stuff is where the injuries happen. And then you got to remember too, like utility work is inherently less dangerous than industrial work. And the reason for that is when something explodes on a utility pole, it goes in three directions, right? It's a sphere out from that pole. When you do it in industrial setting or even your home panel and something explodes, the full force of that blast is coming right at your chest, right? And you're 18 inches from it. So on a utility pole, you're getting a small like sliver of the sphere of energy wave at you. So, in the really big gear with big PPE that you really should never open, they have it to where it's a ballistic rated like chest piece. So that basically, and the way my old boss explained this is it's just going to give you an open casket funeral. Your chest is going to be caved in from the shock wave, or you're going through the brick wall behind you. Right? So like when it comes to electricity, like this is why you hire electricians, right? You can't see anything, you're not testing stuff. You're not pulling out your meters, and the little idiot lights, did you test it on a live outlet that works before using that little idiot light indicator that the circuit's hot? So when it comes to the safety for electricity, you test your meter on a known working outlet, then you go to the thing that you need to make sure is dead and make sure that it's dead, right? And then you have your lockout tagout procedures to make sure that nobody can turn it on, right? Whether that's a single breaker lock or, you need to lock out the full panel. So all that needs to be done. And you do need to wear PPE while you're doing lockout tagout procedures. So for those guys that are doing it, not on a breaker, but if you need to like get into a panel or anything like that to verify that it's dead, you do need to wear PPE. Because again, if you drop your leads or anything like that in the panel, there is a potential for it to, blow. And a lot of this is making sure that you're wearing the right clothing. I mean, we had pictures of guys that wore like tracksuits, right? And they went to reset a breaker, just a simple breaker reset. Turns out the breaker had been reset like 20 times, was wearing a tracksuit on a Saturday, came into the plant after his, or on the way to his kid's soccer game, hit it, flashed on him, and wearing a tracksuit, he just became shrink wrap.
Whoa.
And then now he's in a burn ward for, weeks, months to scrape all of that off of his skin and peel it off because it shrunk wrap right to him.
Damn, it's terrifying. So guys, listen to that segment again right there. Safety first when you're working in these panels and doing these big commercial projects like these big ass grinders. So It's enlightening. I mean, it's terrifying, but it's enlightening when you think about it.
Yeah, and well, and that's why like in these big commercial projects where you're plugging into a like welder outlet with a 40 plug, right? Like that's pretty safe, right? They've made those plugs and everything, and just make sure on your gear, right, nothing's loose, no wires are exposed on the end of that gear. Actually, like pull from the plug, don't pull from the cord, right? That's how you rip a cord out from the plug to where, now something's going to short. And again, you're dealing with chemicals, right? Like, is it flammable? If something shorts at that, and it leads out, now you put a building. I mean, this is like super worst case. And this is as an electrical engineer, like all the stuff that we deal with, right? Like, so long as it works, it works. And we design for worst case scenarios. But it's just these little things to like be aware of, right? You pull from the plug, not from the cord, and that's going to save you having to replace your plug and cord, someplace down the road.
Well, it's important too, because I mean, I want to touch on this a little bit too, because again, in our world, we have on any given job site, we're only typically dealing with 110, maybe 12 gauge or 10 gauge cords, right? So we always talk like our grinders or vacuums, these are 15 amp, it's not big commercial stuff, but it's still, we're plugging into generators that could be, 15,000 kW or something like that. But again, we have 3 to 5 extension cords running around the ground at any given time. We're running grinders, right, and stuff like that. And then again, it's classic where some installers don't care. So they're just taking the equipment, put it on the shelf, right? So then again, you're not pulling from everything you're talking about. And eventually you're that loose cord or that connection's not quite made. And eventually it's going to happen. And we see it a lot with like grinders not working right, or the electrical cord popped out of a vacuum or something like that. Cool. You can fix some of that stuff pretty easy, but it's neglect on the equipment that's going to cause a problem.
Yeah. And don't buy like the cheap $10 extension cord. You guys are in wet environments, like stuff's going to get on them. Get the $25 or whatever they are now, like heavier duty cord, right? You don't need a heavier gauge. You just need a heavier duty cord. It's got more insulation on it is all it comes down to. And then, really inspect your extension cords, just like you'd inspect the rest of your equipment. Again, like working in somebody's garage doing this, it's super key to do that, right? Worst case, like something, sparks, catches the chemicals on fire. Now somebody's garage is on fire, right? Now you got a chemical fire to put out, and you don't have a chemical extinguisher more than likely with you, right? So that's probably something else to add to your truck. But this is like the simple stuff, right? Plug it into a GFCI outlet, right? Those little reset outlets to make sure, because again, you're around water, you're around chemicals, you're outside, or in the garage, right? Like those things need to be done. And it's just a little simple safety thing. That breaker's going to react far faster, in milliseconds, than you could pull the cord out of the wall, right? So if something did happen, power's going to get shut off quickly. And simple little things like that is going to save your life potentially.
Well, let's use that as a segue into the safety brief we just got done with. Now into the current, I guess, right? So the present. So obviously, managing it, using all that experience, you got headhunters coming after you, doing all that type of stuff. Pretty much go work anywhere, traveled around the country. So what are you doing currently, right? So how did Kowabunga Studios start? Why did you want to choose to do that over going to work at 9 to 5? Kind of leading exactly kind of what you're doing right now.
Yeah, a couple of things culminated. Obviously, shingles was one of them. I'd just gotten back recently with a long distance girlfriend who lived in California, and I was in Indianapolis at the time. And so that took me to, like, I had basically a choice to make, right? Am I going to be with this girl and move to California, right? As an engineer, she's a geologist, like her work really doesn't move. So, how am I going to make this happen? I've had this software thing I've been working on. I've hired developers, we're starting to get kind of beta and prototype of it. I've had some interns work on it. The company that I worked for previously didn't really want anything of it. So I've got this idea, this thing, right, to automate how we do designs, right? How we lay out buildings, how we put things together. And so fast forward, moved to California when my year was up, so I didn't have to pay back my signing bonus. It's like a year and a day.
Perfect.
Yeah, like I didn't want to have anything like that. Like I knew I don't have a job, I don't have any, projects on the horizon, like I just took the leap of faith of putting all my stuff in my car and driving to California.
Wow.
So, and we live outside of Yosemite in the kind of foothills of the Sierras. And so, and I'm married now, so that whole thing worked out. But the really in taking that leap was like a job came through like a week after I moved out, right?
Wow.
Like modeling project where I worked on the Facebook headquarters in Seattle, like stuff came through and has gotten me through. And that's kind of been really sticking through everything is, through the pandemic, right? Like I went to launch my software, had meetings with the biggest companies in the world, the, multi-billion dollar engineering and construction firms, had meetings with all of them in January, February of 2020. COVID hit, and then they have billion-dollar projects go on hold, right? They have stadiums that aren't getting built, and it just turned into a ghost town and trying to get software out there. And then the last really 3 years has been just a struggle in change management, right? And these firms are so busy in getting projects out. Construction is at an all-time high, and the industry has a plethora of problems, right? Like me, they're stressed out. Retention is not high, right? There's 10+% turnover in every single firm. So everybody's stressed. They can't really hire any people. They don't have time to train anybody because they got to just get projects out the door. And, then a lot of the old guard is retiring, as they should, right? They've been in the business for 30+ years, most of them, and they're ready to retire, like any normal person should be.
Right.
And so, and they deserve it. They've been dealing with this for a long time. So it's really been hit with a ton of issues, right? All the old talent, and knowledge centers are leaving. The people are harder to bring in, right? Engineering is like not an easy one. It's not easy to become an engineer. Two, the demand on an engineer in a firm is high, right? There's probably a lot of easier paths we could choose. But the stress, again, like 750 million in construction value, like that weighs on our shoulders, right? Like approving change orders, getting projects out the door, like the dollar volumes that we end up dealing with are high, so it's a lot of responsibility and risk, and, trying to keep the owner happy through all of that and the general contractor. And then really just training, like nobody has time to train the new guy. Which I know that's where you come in, Pete, but like nobody has time to train the new guy. They're not going to take a week out of when that new guy comes in, right, to hire them. They're not going to take that week to really train them. They're not in being virtual. It's not like in the old days where you just, hey, you're sitting next to Steve for the next however long until you learn this stuff.
You're not shadowing.
Yeah. Well, or just like listen to his phone conversations. I mean, that's half of what I did was I just sat next to a engineer, and they moved me and him like around the office and stuff whenever we had to move. But like, I just listened to his phone calls, right? I helped him out on his projects. I went through and he taught me everything I need to know on how to model stuff in Revit. So, and that just doesn't happen now with, the remote workforce, or people are now having to go back in the office and they're like, I got to commute, I'm tired of this. Like I got used to not having to commute or anything like that.
Yep.
So with Kowabunga Studios, what really I've transitioned to is to just take that workload off of the engineering firm's plate, right? We'll get you through 75% CDs. And what that means is like everything's going to be circuited, all lighting, power, fire alarm, low voltage data systems, like all the systems are going to be modeled, circuited, annotated, done for you. And the reason I'm calling this 75% CDs is because everybody has a different definition of what, any percent is on a project. Is it 90, 95, 25, 50, pick a number, but really to get everything done. And then all that's left for the engineering firm is final coordination between all the disciplines, specs, and signing and sealing. So really to take them, most of the way there. I know that final coordination can be a bigger thing, and specs are obviously a big thing, and signing and sealing is obviously a big thing. And, I can take it all the way, but to give those firms really to take the bulk of that work off their plate so that really they just end up reviewing final coordination, final details to work through, and then they can ship it out the door, really, to take that off their plate. And it's, pennies on the design fee. It's a small percentage of what their design fees would be.
Right. So the design firms, right? So you're building a hospital per se, and it's call it 20 million. That design firm then hires Kowabunga Studios, then kind of designs it out, right? Takes that stress off of their plate, right? They got other crap they got to worry about, right? You give it to them 75% complete, could finish more if you need to, stuff like that. But you're kind of the middleman, but in reality, you're taking the bulk of the work off of them. Is that kind of what I'm getting?
Yeah, I mean, so most firms are, I'll call it top heavy, even though that's not really what it is, but they have your, account executive, your project manager, your senior engineers, right? Or your licensed guys. And then below that, because BIM isn't really taught in schools, and then you do need to have an engineering mindset. It's not like the old days of CAD or hand drafting where it's like, here's a picture, just duplicate this picture 1,000 times across this for these rooms, right? Like just duplicate this in every single room and, go forth and draw. Today, it's that element needs to be at the right height. It needs to be circuited. It needs to have all the right information behind it because we're going to schedule it, right? So that element, whether it's a receptacle, a light, a piece of concrete, a floor, a wall, door, doesn't matter. It has a database behind it. So you're now no longer just a drafter. You're engineering and designing as you go through a project. So the level of talent that like the technicians, right, the BIM techs, CAD techs need to have is so much higher today than it ever's been because of this. Like everything matters throughout the entire design process. So that technician needs to like understand some basic engineering principles and putting stuff in because they're making design decisions simultaneously as they're drafting. So to that point is you have all this top talent, right? You have your engineers, you have your project managers, you have your account executives, or rainmakers in the project. What you don't typically have is a good drafting resource, and that's what everybody refers to it as, but like a good design resource to go and execute these projects, right? The engineering, in all reality doesn't take up a ton of time. It's all the drafting work that takes up the majority of the project that just can't get done. So an engineer can review it, present it to the client, have a discussion, make changes, and then go back and make those changes in the model to then go forward. So then what I'm doing is keeping engineers engineering, right? And being client interfacing, then, going back into the cave and, being chained to their desk for however long to get these projects out the door.
Right. And I've seen that on some big commercial and projects too, right? So I've been in the where it's still framed up, electrical contractors are in there, right? And they're doing all that and wires for miles and miles and miles and stuff like that. And again, on the floor side of things, we deal with a lot of outlets and stuff in the ground, obviously, and stuff too, right? So I mean, I'm processing through the concrete mindset and the installer mindset of what we do of, if I'm going to pour the concrete or I'm going to coat the floor or whatever that is, I still need to work with you guys or the contractors at some point, right? There's outlets in the floor. There's electrical coming somewhere that we can't hit, touch, get wet, and do whatever that is. So it's at different phases because it's obviously the electrical has to be in before the concrete goes in. So I mean, there's a lot of different subcontractors, I would assume, that you got to have to deal with, and right, that have to do it on the flooring is just one side of it, right?
Yeah. So I mean, like and this is kind of like a disconnect, if you will. So let me try to help spread the gap here. Is you have your architecture and engineering firms, right? And in that there's thousands of hours that go into design, right? So electrical alone, which is like 10% of the design of a given building, like, so take that 300,000 square foot brand new high school. That's 2,000 hours of design just electrically, right? So that's two guys, for 6 months full time. That is all they do on that project, right? They just work on that. Usually it's more than that because they got other stuff, but it's like an 8-10 month design phase. There's, 3 guys on mechanical. There's another 2 guys on Plumbing, there's probably another 3 doing all the low voltage systems. There's probably like 6 architects full-time on that project, right? Then you have structures, got another 3 or 4 guys on it. Civil's got a few on it. So like, and then you just start to do the math, right? This is tens of thousands of hours to design the project before dirt one moves.
Yeah.
And then when you go into the project, right? Because like when I step onto a job site, I have more power than pretty much anybody, like especially when I was doing the healthcare stuff, because I was the mechanical, electrical, plumbing project manager. So is the representative of all the engineering. So me and the architect have basically like the power on the job site, right? To make, granted, all this has got to be documented and papered and all that kind of stuff, but like we are that in the GC, own that job site, right? Like we have so much power walking onto that. But again, is to know that like we need every contractor to be on board with what we're doing, right? I can't just go lording around stuff, especially like I get it. I'm young, I'm in my early 30s now, but I worked with all these old guys. And so you just give them the respect that they deserve, right? And what they're doing. Tell me what your problems are. Let's figure this out. Let's work through it. And once I know what your problem is, like, okay, like I might not have a solution for you right now, but we'll get you one. We'll get you a solution to whatever it is that you're dealing with to make your life easier, right? Horse trading still exists, whether people want to admit it or not. It's like that old boys network, but it's like, you do right by me, I'll do right by you. We're not going to screw each other in this deal. We need this project to like go through quickly. I know you got to get paid for some stuff. I know you don't want to do paperwork on other things. So let's just swap and get it done and everybody's good with it. But to the point of like, for trade coordination, it's so important to, understand and be able to read a set of drawings, right? Especially on commercial projects. So especially like in the concrete world, there's a lot of floor penetrations, right? And the worst, or the thing that you don't want to have to do and granted, you're probably not going to cut through it, but you don't want to have to go and x-ray every single hole that you cut in that project. So on these big commercial jobs, what's happened is they're using like total stations and all the scanning technology to know in that floor where every single piece of rebar is, so that you can now, as like the electrical contractor that didn't get their shit together and put a box in for the concrete pour to hold that spot for the floor box, right? I know where I can drill and where I can't to put that floor box in once the concrete's cured, and I can do it without hitting rebar, right? I can go look at my model. We use a total station and laser point to figure out where I can actually cut now, because I missed it before the concrete pour to put my box in, so that we can not have to cut through concrete. So trade coordination and the complexity of it, especially in the commercial world, you're working up 2, 3, 4 floors to now, where they're laser scanning everything. You can see where every piece of rebar is. And then for you guys to look at every piece of, rebar, if you need any of that, and concrete polishing, you guys probably don't need too much of that, but to at least understand, where electrical out boxes are, or just any floor penetrations or sleeves or anything like that for fire stopping or pipes or cable trays or whatever else that might come through the floor.
Yeah, it's huge. We're not really core drilling, at least my guys typically off of polishing, right? You still got to be able to look at a set of plans and realize, hey, I can get down this 2,000 square feet at a time. This is a hallway. This is going to be a bathroom. They just put in piping or this outlet. So, it's complex, and it goes along those same lines. And it's funny you mentioned that, because literally the episode that we shot right before this was a gentleman who's been in the construction industry for 43 years, but he talked about how he was a young buck on job sites in New York City, having to be in his 20s and talk to these 50-year-old bears that are, stubborn. And there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And like you said, there's horse trading that goes on. You got to pat each other's back. So we had that conversation. It was pretty funny. And there's one thing you touched on too, and I want to lead this in now as we talk about the future. Okay. So I want to kind of touch on, one, where do you think the industry is going, right? So the economy's changed since COVID, right? we know exactly what's happening with the big builders, kind of put some stuff on hold. Now it might be changing. So where's the big commercial industry going, right? So how do you guys seeing that? And then like, what's your plan for Kowabunga and how are you seeing that? What's your, without giving away your secrets, like what's your future?
So I see this in a few ways, and I put this out there years ago, but I see a hybrid work model, right? And we're seeing really that come into fruition. So what does this mean for you and your guys? So long as people can afford it, their houses are going to get bigger, right? They need another room for an office, right? Or they're going to do something in the garage, which is perfect for what you guys are doing. I see that that's going to be a thing that's here to stay in the whole work remotely, hybrid roles, that kind of thing, which also means that office spaces can be smaller. I've been into some larger organizations here recently, and, they come in the office like 2 days a week. Outside of that, it's a ghost town. So then you can really start to look at your density of office space, and office space is going to get reduced. Now there's still going to be a need for it, but I don't think to the extent that it was. And a lot of office spaces now are getting turned into condos.
Yep.
Because again, you're downtown. People like being downtown. They want to be close to stuff. And then if they're going to work down there, they'd rather have a condo. So I see that. I see in institution work, that's going to be continue. Now, higher ed is going to be a tricky thing because enrollment's down in most higher education. So for your institutional work, granted, it's still going to be there. They still have endowments to spend. They still have money to get through every year, but it's probably not going to be at the levels that it was. Now, hospitals and healthcare, they're still going to do on their trajectory. Again, they're funded primarily by Medicare, Medicaid, not like private insurance. So all that money is still going to flow through the pipeline for healthcare institutions. So that work will continue. We'll see a lot of road work and those pieces to continue. And then, other big infrastructure projects, there's going to be airports and roadways and bridges and all that kind of stuff is always going to be there. Like, I don't see that going away. And in California, shit, man, Caltrans works on stuff that is like nice and like there's no potholes. I was back in Michigan, and the joke is the state flower was out in full force. Those nice construction cones that are everywhere.
It's orange season.
Well, and MDOT has no problems like ramp closed, no go here. Like, don't even let anybody know, just closed. You want to go on this road? No good. Pick another road.
For months, and they're not even working on it.
Well, and they're doing like around Detroit, like 70, like every major roadway is under construction, and they just shut everything down, put everybody on one side, and just so they can plow through, putting in, because it's all concrete roadways there.
Yep.
So they're plowing through, getting those things done. So, I mean, as far as the future goes, like, construction is here to stay. You can't outsource it. People are going to be here. The problem that we're going to go through is it's labor. It's like I talked about earlier, is a skill, which, Pete, that's where you come in and training these guys to do it right. And giving them that skill to go out in the world and, provide a valuable service to everybody. As I talked about, like, engineering firms really don't have, there's no training curriculum. It's, harder now to the osmosis method that they use. Really, they didn't have to think about it. Right here, sit next to Steve for the next 3 years. Like, that's not happening. There's no real training curriculum. Everybody's pretty secretive, if you will, in the A&E space. Like, they don't share as openly as maybe in the contracting space and world. So I think labor, and especially skilled labor, and it's not something like, as much as we've done automation, there's, to get to a perfectly automated building, like Google tried this for architecture, there are so many code regulations, so many specific AHJ requirements, so many specific site conditions, so many specific budget problems, so many products out there that, like, a Google isn't even able to deal in the built environment. That's why Google Fiber doesn't go anywhere, because they're like, shit, this is expensive. We make infinite margin on search and ads. Why would we do this whole like physical infrastructure thing? So from that aspect, really anything in the services, right? Which is why my models transition all the services from software. is services are what people want, right? They just want to hand it off. Hey, you do it, right? Which is why it's so important, like, especially in your residential side, that's a service. People could go buy a grinder. They could go buy, not your product, but some other product and figure it out and do it, but they don't want to, right? Those people don't want to build a deck. They don't want to paint their house. They don't want to like do a lot of things, right? Or they don't feel comfortable, even though they might have the skill, they don't feel comfortable to go and do it. So services are going to be here to stay for the ever. Like, I don't see services going away. And then even to talk about like robotics, especially in construction or like in people's homes, like somebody's still got to go and deliver the robot, and then in a construction site and in commercial world, like the floor's not even, like concrete setting. The robot doesn't really know where to go. Yes, it's mapped, all that kind of stuff, but like doesn't know how to drive over a stick or a broom handle that's left there, or an extension cord, or whatever else that gets left on the floor in a job site. As clean as you want to make them, right? Stuff like that still exists, right? They're going to bump into a pallet. They're going to, knock shit over. And that is not, it's not going to come for your job. There's specific applications that robotics have been put into job sites, but like the cleanliness of the site is like something you would never expect it to have in under normal circumstances. So at the end of the day, like being a service provider, being skilled in what you do, being able to talk to clients, like all those skill sets are not going away. You still need somebody to talk to a client. You still need somebody to sell a job. You still need somebody to show up and be there. You still need somebody to clean up the job site afterwards. Like all those pieces of human interaction are not going to go away. And, let alone doing a good job, but is to be a great service provider for your end clients. And that's all Kowabunga Studios is focused on, is being a great service provider for engineers, contractors, design build firms, and helping them to really get their projects out the door faster, lower effort. They don't have to worry about training or onboarding or any of that stuff. Those are the things that I'm going to focus on, and bringing more people into Kowabunga Studios, long term, and really empower my local economy here in the foothills of California.
No, that's powerful. I guess curiosity for me is, do you guys only do commercial industrial, or are you guys going to try to get into some residential, like home builders or Pulte, these big people, stuff like that?
So interestingly enough, you really just need an architect for most homes. And then even in most home design, you don't actually need an architectural stamp until it gets over like 10,000 feet. So like in most residential construction, a 2,000, 1,500, 1,600 square foot house, 1,200, you don't need a engineer stamp of approval. Now there are a couple states like Arizona, I think, has to have an engineer stamp on it, which is kind of ridiculous, but whatever. So yeah, like most of this, like electricians, are in all reality, most electricians are totally competent to do a house. It's not complicated wiring. It's a standard 200 amp panel. Like there's a lot of stuff that has been codified effectively to where they don't really have to think about it. Like you need a dedicated circuit or two in your kitchen. You need, basically every room's going to be circuited together. All the lights will be circuited together. The, washer, dryer, HVAC unit, hot water heater, they just get their own. And like it's not as complicated as we get into like commercial space, and you've got life safety systems. It's got to be signed and sealed. You get into generator systems, paralleling gear, right? Like a lot of more complicated stuff. And then in commercial, you're also doing a design bid build, or design build in most cases. So they're going off of the drawings, right? It becomes a contract in those documents. That's why they call them construction or contract documents, CDs, is, that now becomes a contract as to what they build, what they're going to put in, what they're going to install. And you don't have that in residential. It's like, hey, I got a house, this is what we want. And, you pick finishes with your general contractor and go from there.
Makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, guys, we're going to kind of wrap it up. So I guess, Dillon, where can everybody find you? We'll put links down below, but where can people contact you?
Yeah, so I'm super active on LinkedIn. Again, just go link below and hit me up on LinkedIn or follow me. I put out fairly regular blog there. I haven't had maybe as more insightful things to talk about here recently, but typically that's daily posts on LinkedIn. And then we also, which Pete's been a 2-time guest on, the Construction Corner podcast comes out every Tuesday. You can find us there. We talk about all things construction, so from concrete to, general contractors. We had a woman on to talk about like irrigation and doing massive home building in Montana here recently. So, and in the West. So it really a wide ranging segment of guests, right? From guys doing residential to concrete to, high end homes to commercial to really a little bit of everything. So Construction Corner podcast and LinkedIn are really the two main platforms. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, but more for like personal stuff. So if you want all the good business content, then head over to LinkedIn or listen to the podcast.
Yeah, guys, I can't say it enough. The Construction Corner podcast with Dillon and Matt. Again, I've been on it twice. It was amazing. So I'm going to link that below. Again, it's everything construction based, right? So it's just like us, and we're sharing industry contractor knowledge, right? So if you can't pick out something from every single episode that you're going to learn and grow your business from, you're not actually listening. So the links will all be below. Dillon, thanks again for your time. I appreciate it. And I'm sure you'll be on again as we continue to grow this as well. So any last final words?
Thanks for having me on, Pete. It's been a pleasure. It's always interesting to hear from you and what you've got going on, and then to see really everything that Valence is doing in terms of, and I love it that you're empowering guys to go out, be able to provide for themselves, their families, grow a little business, for themselves and hire some guys. And, again, more and more, a lot of us can't change what's going on in the country nationally, but we can change our local communities. We can change at home. We can start there, and just getting excellent. Guys, start eating better, drinking less, reducing your stress. All those kind of things are going to help not only your personal life but your business. And I highly recommend to start something like 75 Hard. But again, as much as we all get frustrated with what's going on in the world, we can control a lot of things in our life. And then again, to put more into our local communities, local charities, local events, hiring people locally, bring on that high school kid that wants to learn, that kind of stuff is going to be really impactful, and just put your mindset in a much better place than listening to national news all the time.
Yeah, don't do that. And we actually, it kind of reminds me, we should actually do another one talking about the business coaching, right? Some of the stuff that we've been into based off of that and putting it into the construction industry, right? Because that's what we do, right? So we take our national level coaching, right, if you will, and we build it down to how it benefits us. So I think we should do another episode just on what the coaching that we've personally been through and how we met, and how we implement it into your company and everything on the contractor side. So
I'm game.
all right. Well, I'll follow up with you on that. So, all right, guys, again, thanks to Dillon. Thanks for another amazing episode. Guys, one last thing that we always end with is we are having the Concrete and Coatings Mastermind at the end of February. So this is for primarily decorative concrete coatings people, but it's going to be something that's going to be in Dallas, Texas. Dates are not confirmed, but we're bringing industry people together, 300 to 500 people in the room for multiple days, all learning about how to build and scale a business. So guys, keep in the loop for more information on that. You'll see Dillon again on that. But again, this has been another amazing episode of Beyond the Crete podcast. And again, Dillon, thanks again. And guys, as like I always say, I got you.